companies. But as they grow, they're subject to the same kind of creeping bureaucracy. You get more layers, you get more staff groups that accumulate more power, legal has to sign off on everything, employees have a diminishing share of voice. I won't name it, it'd be a little unfair, but one kind of darling of the new economy, a company that's a leader in cloud services, by the time that company got to $4 billion in revenue, it had 600 vice presidents. Like, how the hell does that happen? And so think about the alternative here for a moment. If you wanted to build an organization where people gave you their best every day, an organization where people were willing to take risks, they were willing to stretch themselves, to go outside the safe precincts as management as usual, who were passionate about their customers, who felt accountable and committed, what kind of organization would that be? And in my experience, it's a startup. You know, in a startup, employees are united by their passion to make a difference in the world. Teams are small, the roles are loosely defined. You don't feel you're slotted into some role. They're very ambitious goals that force everyone to think lean automatically and to be very creative in leveraging outside resources. The preferred communication thing is an all-hands meeting on a Friday afternoon. People have a lot of freedom to take prudent risks. In other words, it's a company that's bold, simple, lean, open, flat, and free. That's the real advantage of most startups. It is not the business idea. Business ideas are relatively cheap. I remember decades ago being inside of Daimler and Ford and General Motors and talking to them about the future of mobility and electrical powertrains and autonomous vehicles. Those ideas have been around for a generation. So it's not the business idea so much as an organization that has that can move at that speed, that is that hungry, that is that lean. And it's quite a contrast with what you find in most of the large companies that I know. Now, at the heart of this, there is a fundamental paradox that we have to resolve. Bureaucracy is perhaps the most important human invention of the last 150 years. It was not the electric motor or the locomotive or antibiotics or indoor plumbing. Those are all wonderful inventions. None of them would have made any difference at all if we hadn't figured out how to bring people together and do things at scale with perfect replicability and ever-increasing efficiency. That's why you can afford an incredible digital phone. That's why you can take holidays around the world and afford the international air travel. That's why you can have a closet filled with fast fashion. So let's be clear. What we learned how to do with bureaucracy, the control and the consistency and the coordination, those were huge benefits to humankind. Think about this. In the next generation iPhone, which will come out later this year, the chip at the heart of that, which will presumably be called the A13, I don't know yet, but the new chip manufactured by TSMC will be built on a 5-nanometer architecture. That's the distance between the transistors, the gates on that chip. 5 nanometers is what your fingernail will grow in the next 5 seconds. Can you imagine building something at that kind of scale? How much control do I need over how many variables to pull that off, right? We need to be thankful that we have learned how to have that sort of control. So that's the paradox. In some ways, bureaucracy's made us far more capable. We can do together what we could never have done alone. But on the flip side, it ends up making our organizations inertial, incremental, and in many ways inhuman. So the question is, can we buy these blessings duty-free? How do we still have the efficiency, the cost, and so on, but organizations that don't kill the human soul? And so I want to take the rest of the time I have with you to kind of lay out a roadmap for doing that. And it's not easy, but it's something you can start to do in your organization now. You don't need anybody else's permission. You can do it. So let's talk about what we need. First of all, I think we have to start to count the cost. You know, I was watching something last night on one of the BBC channels about the war on plastic. And you look around the world with plastic and micro beads being literally in everything. in wildlife, in fish, in plants, in our diet, in our food. It's just inescapable. And 20 years ago, nobody really worried about that. Today, most organizations will do an environmental impact statement. We pay attention to things that we can measure, CO2 emissions, and we start to worry about that. And the fact is, most of the costs of bureaucracy are invisible in large organizations. We want to change that. You've probably heard about the BMI, Body Mass Index. Have to pay attention to that. Let me give you another one. The Bureaucratic Mass Index. How could we measure that? Because the dilemma is most of the costs of bureaucracy never show up on a P&L. Yeah, the additional head count, a little of the bloat at the top, that shows up. What doesn't show up is all that friction in decision making. What doesn't show up is